Artificial intelligence is reinventing business as we speak. You can either get up to speed or get left behind. The choice is yours, and really, it's a no-brainer. Join Cognitive Path founders Geoff Livingston and Greg Verdino as they chat with AI experts about the latest ideas, trends, and technologies that are creating the future of business today. This is No Brainer.
Hey, this is Greg Verdino. Welcome back to No Brainer, and I am here as always with Geoff Livingston. How's it going, my friend?
Good. How about you? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Friday, April 9th is when we're recording this for anybody who is paying attention. As you know, AI moves very, very quickly. So there's our timestamp, April 9th. There's 10th or 11th. Or what is today's date?
It's the 11th.
All right. It's the 11th.
We're going to edit that out.
Anyway, but so it is a late Friday afternoon. Looking forward to the weekend. How about you, Geoff?
Very much so. I'm off to a vacation in Utah with my family, so I'm looking forward to that.
Very nice. Yeah. Very nice. Well, we will miss you. Before we dive in, for anybody who is listening, of course, please be sure to subscribe, to rate, to review, to leave reviews, to like, to do any of the good stuff you do on social media to share and get the word out. We appreciate all of your support almost as much as we appreciate your attention, your listenership, your viewership. And with that, I want to hand it to you, Geoff. Who do we have?
We have an amazing entrepreneur from Texas, or living in Texas right now. Her name is Britt Bischoff. She has come out of the commercial marketing world, but is now full on in the AI disinformation space. I met her through a cause marketing, cause advocacy organization that we both spoke at. And she is also the founder of Early Dawn, which helps people track misinformation. And she is also the owner of Britt Bischoff Strategies. And so with that, Britt, how are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
We're excited. As you can tell, it's a little bit of a clown show on the No Brainer podcast. We know that you've been in this space for quite some time now, and you're actively engaged in helping people work through misinformation and disinformation. Obviously, AI has a big part to play in that, both through the way search is evolving today with search answer engines, and then with just fake content, and then AI eating its own content. And it just feels like this gigantic problem that's getting worse and worse. But maybe, I don't know how you feel about this. Should we start with just defining what misinformation and disinformation is for the audience?
That sounds like a great place to me. So misinformation is false or misleading information that's shared by someone who may not know that it's incorrect. It's usually done without the intent to harm. So it could be outdated stats or sometimes Reddit posts, or just sharing a deep fake unknowingly, but it's done without the intent to harm. But disinformation, this is deliberately deceptive. And this is shared intentionally to mislead, manipulate, sow distrust. And both of these spread in pretty similar ways, but disinformation campaigns are often strategic and coordinated, and the big part here is that they serve an agenda, and typically they're designed to provoke strong emotions. So we're increasingly seeing the latter, especially in political and social spaces, such as with the abortion ballot initiative, such as Amendment 4 in Florida last year. Usually some dead giveaways when it comes to disinformation is anything that's a claim that features anything that's medically inaccurate.
Anything on Truth Social? I'm sorry.
Probably not a source used for validation, but yeah, so anything like with emotional or hyperbolic or sensationalized type language, that's usually dead giveaway. But then there's a third type, and it typically falls under the disinformation bucket, and that's malinformation. And this is technically true information that is usually worked with some spin, intentionally to deceive, to manipulate, and to harm.
This is a serious topic. It's a pretty scary kind of time with the information war going on, and we're seeing this daily unfold. I think this was the market week where we saw people were told to buy. There's claims of insider trading. There's all sorts of crazy things going around, some of which all depends on your political spectrum. I think, in full transparency, most of us lean, based off of my joke, towards the non-current administration view. But, what's your take on the current state of the information war?
We live in interesting times. This is a moment where algorithms are curating essentially the narratives around us. And this is also a moment when I look at the data. So part of my job is to really zoom out and to look at where is the American public? What are we paying attention to? What are we talking about in online spaces? And what kind of questions are we asking? Right now, we are absolutely living through American Civics 101, where we didn't pay attention in high school. It's happening in our faces right in front of us. And we have so many questions and a lot of chatter and a lot of discussions about it. And AI-powered search is now here. People are taking to search engines and AI search to sort of fill in these blanks to really understand the world around us. So again, we live in this world of algorithmic narratives. This is also a time when, the current administration, those in power, have also shown us their intentions and strategies, such as with Project 2025. And they have real implications and on information manipulation as an institutionalized strategy. So, to give an example, we're losing valuable public data, creating data voids. Press access to the White House has been restricted, but yay for AP regaining access to the White House. Big tech.
Yes, that was big good news, right?
Yeah. A day when we desperately needed it. Apologies for my dog back there. She's apparently really excited about this.
Everybody's got animals here. I'll be very grateful if my cat doesn't jump up on the desk and wipe his tail across my nose like he did during one episode.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, God. I did not love that, Britt.
But yeah, the big tech protections, they're also being dismantled. Most of our protections for disinformation and misinformation from social platforms have been rolled back. So we're at the mercy of search engines, social media, AI tools, and they're all also being actively manipulated with strategic narrative warfare through political actors, foreign entities, interest groups, to control what we see and what we believe. So I also think that this is a moment to exercise caution and extreme critical thinking in what we're seeing in all of these algorithmic narratives that are in front of our faces.
My man, you got thoughts on that? I could see it bubbling.
I am bubbling. I've got a lot of thoughts. Even before AI, obviously, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, this has been a challenge, right? I mean, the interwebs is loaded with it. I'm sure barroom conversations, kitchen table conversations are loaded with it, have been loaded with it for generations, but it's getting worse. From your perspective, if we now we fast forward into the age of AI, right, where it is now sort of faster, cheaper to kind of create misinformation and distribute misinformation and disinformation at a speed and scale that is just mind-boggling, right? Where, I guess, from your perspective, how do you see that kind of playing out? What is that like? What are the implications of that, I guess, is really what I'm getting at from your perspective as somebody who's living in this space.
Yeah, maybe even to add on that, are we doomed? Is that the worst case scenario upon us, or are we going to be able to fight back?
Yeah, no, I am an optimist. So there's several things that, need to happen in order for us to adequately fight back. But marketers and civil society and all of us here in America, we're not helpless. There's things that we can do. To go back to your earlier question about the prevalence of AI-generated content, this is a serious concern. So bad actors have become increasingly more sophisticated and really intelligent about they understand the system is what I'm trying to say. And they know that publishing fast, filling voids that are left, they can shape public perception before people are really even know. And there's this term called pink slime. What you're talking about with mass-produced AI-generated content, some of it is done to appear like legitimate journalism, and it's not. Usually there's something off about it. The intention is to train LLMs to skew public opinion and kind of give like this false sense of reinforcement or false consensus on a topic, so that way their narrative or the narrative attack can weave its way into these algorithmic answers. And they can do so because it's become faster, cheaper, and a lot harder to detect. There are ways and tools that you can identify, and again, like really think critically and identifying who specifically the sources are. However, I do want to say that search engines and AI search engines like ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of their answers are they're trained on public information, like Wikipedia and a lot of these, what's available in the public sphere. What happens is that it becomes harder to detect and correct once it's actually in an answer or once it's, in those search results. It can appear neutral even when it's wrong, and then it does give that legitimacy to some false narratives, but it also helps to reinforce it over time, unfortunately. The trust with AI search and answer engines are increasing on a daily basis. So I want to say it was 70% in February, the last time this report was released, that more Americans are actually using AI search in their attempt to understand what's going on in the world around us. However, the trust is still around 40%. So there's a wide gap between what people are trusting or the use of AI and how people are trusting. Meanwhile, platforms like Google, people still very readily, and they put a lot of trust into Google. Sometimes maybe they shouldn't. Around 82% of search market share is still with Google. And since ChatGPT and the emergence of AI platforms since about 2023, it really hasn't impacted its market share or the usage of Google yet. In fact, what we're seeing is people are they're referencing cross-platform. They're using Google simultaneously to all these other search verticals and all of these in AI search to sort of verify. But even that is problematic because when we have such proliferation of disinformation and misleading content, and search engines are heavily targeted for a reason, people very much believe what they see in these top search results. And there was a study not too long ago that was published on Nature, and it showed that when people actually turned to Google, by the way, one of the most common searches, especially last year during an election year, was for fact-checking. People wanted to know whether or not they can believe these claims that they were hearing and seeing. And when they did their fact-checking, there were headlines that were also misleading and information. And this Nature study showed that the majority of people, when they were doing their research about misinformation, were actually more likely to then believe misinformation after they did that fact check. But when it's not appropriately handled.
Yeah.
Wow. I know we kind of like danced around it a little bit earlier, but obviously I think we're being pretty straightforward if we say that the current administration is a big source of disinformation. And I mean, just go to the White House website and it's turned into this almost media operation for disinformation in a lot of ways. Things are very spun. What is the role that entire ecosystem is playing on social issues and disinformation? How are people tracking this?
Yeah. To be blunt, it serves an agenda.
Right.
To be fair, this is the first time I've had to put the White House on a monitoring list for disinformation or, problematic narratives. So I'm currently working with some organizations who want to stay ahead of disinformation.
But to be clear, hold on, before we get in, I mean, like, we are talking about the guy that created the whole birther movement. So this isn't new news, and it shouldn't be like something that causes outrage when we talk about this. Things are very spun.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, so to give an example, Project 2025, working with organizations who want to stay ahead of this disinfo, we're tracking the movement towards authoritarianism as well. A key hallmark of authoritarianism, as I'm sure everyone is aware, is really the ability to control and manipulate public knowledge. And Project 2025 really gave us a blueprint. They showed us point blank what they wanted to do. And these strategies mirror tactics used by authoritarian regimes to distort reality, to suppress dissent, to manipulate the public, basically through digital infrastructure, press access, what is said. Many of these tactics are already in motion. There's actually a tracker. I didn't create this tracker, but it's fantastic, and I can provide a link. But this tracker shows that we're about 42% of the way into completing the implementation of what was in Project 2025. So how this impacts public issues and just society in general, right? We can look to examples like what happened with COVID. COVID-19 disinformation showed some pretty serious divides. It politicized a public health issue, assisted the polarization, and drove it even further, and it led to some really severe health outcomes.
Why do you think, information, good information, is generally readily available, right? We could take a look at any of the examples we're talking about, right, where there was clearly a portion of the population who was convinced that Trump had fully and wholly disavowed Project 2025 to the point to which he wasn't even aware of it, or that Project 2025 didn't say any of the things that the alarmists on the left were saying it said. Yet the entire thing was published and readily available. Where you look at, and anybody could have accessed it and read it and seen that it was everything that people were saying it contained, it in fact contained. Everyone who was involved, not everyone, but many of the people involved with the writing of it were people that were in his circle, right? All that, right? That's all readily available. In the case of COVID, lots and lots and lots of scientific literature was being published around COVID. I mean, granted, we were learning about the disease as it was unfolding around us, so not everything was fully accurate. But even in the face of all of this proper information, I'll call it, about COVID and protecting yourself against COVID and treatments around COVID, there was a percentage of the population who was more than willing and happy and eager to say, no. Monkey's Bottom 47328 on Twitter said that's not true, and take that as their authoritative source. What's the underlying problem there is what I'm trying to get at. There's clearly a media literacy issue, or an information literacy issue that seems to make people more susceptible to misinformation and disinformation and less willing to question the validity of information and effectively do their own research.
Well,
so what's happening there?
So much to unpack on that one.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. It's hard to know kind of where to begin. So, of course, media literacy biases. People so badly want to believe in what they personally hold to believe true. Also, the act of media literacy and the fact-checking and doing your own research has also been targeted. So let me give you an example from just in 2024. So in 2024, Trump had claimed early on that he was a moderate on abortion, and despite
behaviors.
Yeah, thank you so much. Words are failing. It's late in the day. And so he built sort of a narrative reinforcement environment that worked around when people were doing their research, when people were triggered to find out more information about his abortion stance. And this media coverage that was really shaped in part by that strategic messaging, amplified from coverage from sensationalized statements, algorithms from social, all of that kind of helped to further determine what else was covered in the media landscape, sensationalism, what's trending. Algorithms do fuel what gets picked up simply because that's what's they believe to be important, or they believe the audiences want to know. This really just amplified coverage of sensationalized statements from social platforms, and it embedded in the search narrative those months of headlines and the talking points that downplayed his role in ending Roe or painting him as a moderate on abortion within the search landscape. So by the time I'm not sure how familiar you are with the RBG PAC, but it's an Elon Musk funded venture. This campaign rolled out weeks before election day, and it triggered some curiosity and fact checking from audiences. So basically, it equated Trump with RBG. It had a very specific audience in mind. It was very targeted, and it triggered their search interest to learn more about Trump and RBG. And they were met with algorithmic narratives and search feeds that were stacked with layers of these headlines that really only reinforced a narrative despite the deeper record from a different story.
With all this news and algorithmic driving behind it, a lot of my historical information about the way these algorithms work is that they use X as the source for trending data. Is that still true? Are they using other social platforms to determine what trending topics are, or is X still the dominant one as the public pipeline of information?
I mean, I wouldn't say that X is necessarily used as a serious validation source, but what I would say about how X is being used is it's used for signals and amplification,
right?
Even though it's really a breeding ground for disinformation. Those with journalistic integrity aren't using X for verification or validation, but they will amplify essentially what is being said in these spaces. And sometimes these newsrooms typically sometimes chase what's trending, specifically from the news influencers, like on TikTok, for example. They look to see what's trending and then they create content around that. But
and that's why sometimes we see a lag, right?
Right. So this can also be problematic because it further reinforces and it further plays into narratives that maybe, don't need to be, that could be more harmful than anything. Mm-hmm. However, so I wanted to say about X, sometimes when sensationalized content is picked up around, let's say, a public figure's X post, or this can be exactly what disinformation campaigns rely on. So sometimes they bait media coverage with the sensationalism, sometimes with outrageous or misleading claims, knowing that if the press covers it, it becomes part of that algorithmic narrative. And then over time, again, that creates repeated headlines, even if based on false premises. They stack up in Google and AI generated answers. We did see this in Ohio's Issue 1 in 2023 and Florida's Amendment 4, and then in other states where there were public officials that were they were giving talking points that were factually incorrect, and their actions and talking points would lead to coverage from the media that would also get embedded in these algorithms. So that way when voters went to do their own research, they were then met with what looked to be like confirmation from these search results.
Did we see this with the Wisconsin election that we just had that was all over the news?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not the one to ask on that one. I didn't actually.
Damn, I was trying to be timely.
Yeah, I didn't work on that one, so I didn't follow that very closely from the search narratives, but yeah.
That's cool. Maybe like a transition for our corporate friends. Why does this matter to somebody that's maybe running a large company or maybe a trade association or even a large nonprofit with your cause, right? Like, why does this misinformation, disinformation vortex that's hovering over the media world matter so much?
I think that it's really important for everyone to really know that anybody can be subject to mis and disinformation. I'm not sure how well your listeners are up to speed on what's been happening with Girl Scouts of America or Girl Scout cookies, but there's been some pretty...
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
This is a pretty relevant and recent example that just illustrates how disinformation and narrative attacks can just blindside even the most trusted and iconic brands as a Girl Scout. So just this month, there was some politically charged disinformation that exploded online after a lawsuit alleged that their cookies contain harmful levels of metals and pesticides. And this all originated from an activist group that had a history of spreading misleading food safety claims. The study really lacked peer-reviewed scientific backing. It was very unscientific and didn't really have the data to back it. Additionally, what I noticed in follow-up research, just to build off of what others had reported on, how it spread was through legal influencers. So people who have lawyers on social media who are influential, and they're essentially sponsored by legal software for lawsuits. So they were incentivized to spread because they were covering this probably without knowing that it was misinformation or disinformation, but they also had a responsibility in the spread of this issue as well.
That's a lot of risk if you're a brand to suddenly get taken down like that.
Right. So, I mean, anyone can be targeted by narrative attacks, but especially when, your practices or your values push back against political extremism, right? And you stand firm in your values. So it's great for organizations and companies to really be prepared and take the necessary precautions.
Yeah. I think that's a key point there, is that any brand is, or at least has to be aware of, their susceptibility to a narrative attack. And that's always been the case, right? At any point in history, somebody could just launch a detrimental campaign of some sort to take down a brand, rightly or wrongly. Like I remember in the early days of social, one of the almost first case studies was this thing called Dell Hell, where Dell treated a journalist poorly. Jeff Jarvis didn't want to repair his broken laptop or something, and he took them down, and it became this huge, like, how to deal with social media detractors case study, right? That's a narrative attack. But now, of course, with AI and with all of the dynamics you're describing, where you have willful disinformation, you've got disinformation then kind of becoming misinformation for unwitting people who share it, and then paid influencers getting involved. So now you're accelerating it, throwing fuel on the fire, right? And now all of a sudden you have these massive narrative attacks, right? In Girl Scouts, the one you're describing is like this massive nefarious thing, but then also you had examples in the olden days of like last year when, remember that thing with Le Creuset and Taylor Swift, where there was like the fake Taylor Swift promotion giving away a Le Creuset, right? Which didn't even make sense, but it's just like mischief. But still, the brand has to get out there now and explain this to people who get pissed off. I entered your contest and I didn't, blah, 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 right? So that it might be something that's where it's like really malicious, or it could be something that's mischievous, but it's still a problem for the brand. I think the other thing that brands don't understand on the other side of this is every dollar you spend they understand the dollars you spend support the media that you're paying with those dollars, right? And I don't think brands are aware of just how much of their media spend goes against mis and disinformation. Like Ad Fontes Media, I believe, and also NewsGuard track these kinds of things. And I think it was a NewsGuard study that found it was like literally hundreds of millions of dollars of ad dollars were being placed through programmatic networks onto disinformation made for advertising websites. And brands just don't know this kind of stuff is happening. So on the one hand, you're getting attacked, right, in a narrative attack. On the other hand, you're blowing your money and funding the disinformation ecosystem by not being precise with your ad buys. I think that's an interesting dynamic that a lot of companies aren't thinking about, but to your point, absolutely need to be.
So maybe, like, with this in mind and like the brand safety issues, what can a brand do to prepare to kind of defend against whether it's just sort of rando posts that goes crazy, or what we see more and more is just all of a sudden you're targeted by somebody in power and they just start turning you into the culture war du jour. What can you do about that?
There's several things that brands can do. So first, I want to say that marketers are in a unique position right now. You're not helpless, and you have the skills needed to counter mis and disinformation attacks. There. So the second is awareness, first and foremost, is super important. So monitoring the environment, keeping a close eye on the environment surrounding your brand, your industry, the feeds and the narratives that you're participating in and that surrounds you, and including also where your ad dollars are going, to your point earlier, and then do an internal audit of where your vulnerabilities are. So my work specializes in preemptive strategies.
Crisis communications, almost being ready.
Something like that, yes. So doing an internal audit of where your vulnerabilities are and really assess where bad actors could attack you on. Not necessarily where they are right now, but anticipate it. And having this level and a 360 understanding really helps you to prep for moments when you do need to respond rapidly. And then having those preemptive strategies in scenario planning are super effective at moving fast and responding effectively because you've anticipated, you've prepared for this. So I'd also encourage, since this is an AI podcast, something that I led a case study a couple months back where we leveraged contained environments with AI simulations to help simulate response to a narrative attack to test responses. So that's something that your audiences could absolutely do. And it was pretty eye-opening and affirming of what strategies would work and what type of messaging and what kind of response you could anticipate or work into your response plan. So the narrative intelligence tools exist. You can use AI to track emerging threats, looking at things like sentiment shifts, false claims, and this all helps you to develop strategies to help you to deploy counter messaging pretty swiftly. And then collaborative defense where you can, if you can partner with platforms and letting them know. Flagging disinformation in this environment is a little bit more difficult since those protections have been lessened. So just maybe having a line of communication with a representative with these platforms would be helpful. There's also some tools to help identify if you're interested in personal biases and misinformation. Definitely encourage teams to use things like bias checkers, media literacy tools, not just for content creation, but for your own team's internal resilience. You can look at your feed. You can help to identify what your own potential biases could be, how it could impact your susceptibility to misinformation.
And everybody's got biases, right?
Yes.
Just to be clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I had a moment of truth myself several weeks ago where there was a deep fake that it was very convincing for even a lot of people in this field. I mean, it had everybody fooled, and then it just moved so fast. So yeah, take a breath. When you want things to be true, when you're feeling an emotion or you're feeling a discomfort there, then just take a breath. Maybe don't post. Yeah.
There should be something that every time you hit the post button or the share button or whatever, that there's just sort of like at least a 15-minute buffer, and then maybe a big window thing pops up like the olden days where like you have to stomp the spider or something, and it's like, are you sure you want to post this? Did you check it? Do you know it's real? And to Geoff's point, it's everybody, right? Everybody has these things. There was a thing, was it a couple of weeks ago, that I know a lot of people on the left, just to be fair, were sharing about, it was an audio recording of J.D. Vance bad-mouthing Trump, and it went like wildfire. All of the liberal influencers were sharing it, and it turned out it was AI generated and totally fake, right? So everybody falls prey to these things because every one of us does have biases, and when something feeds those biases, we're like, yeah! But
exactly. That's how it works.
I'm very biased towards very short haircuts.
Do you want to talk about the Texas bot regulation?
Yeah, let's do it.
There's so much, honestly. Man, this
what
could
is
have
it?
been
I
a
mean,
longer
Texas of all places too, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I thought they were invested in disinformation. But wait, just in the state capitol building. Go ahead.
Yeah. The last piece I'll say about what you can do is really just paying attention to what's happening in your state legislature. But particularly right now, pay attention to what's also happening in Texas, because there's been a slew of bills that have been introduced that would impact mis and disinformation. And these bills do face some significant challenges and effectiveness. But what's happening in Texas is important because Texas is a testing ground, and it's a major battleground for tech policy. So bills that are introduced here also set precedents for other states as well. And two particular bills that have been introduced this year have been SB 2637 and SB 2638, which both deal with bot regulation. And why this is a big deal is because bots fuel disinformation, and they are highly effective at rapid dissemination and mimicking humans to amplify false narratives, to also skew elections and to manipulate even commercial transactions. So the Social Media Bots Transparency Act, that's 2637, this would force social platforms to clearly label any accounts that they know are bots and to warn people against content that these automated accounts might contain information. And then failure to comply would require a $20 or $7,500 fine per violation. And then the other bill is the Digital Deception Prevention Act. And this bill really takes aim at bots that trick people into two key areas, which is the commercial spaces, where bots might pose as humans to push fake news or fake products and reviews and scams. And then the second is through election interference, where these automated accounts would or can spread misinformation while pretending to be real voters. So content amplification, comments, engagement, stuff like that. And the core rule is that bots are still allowed, but they just have to disclose that they're bots or they'll face fines. So limitations, I mean, these bills are meant to bring transparency and accountability. So they're great steps forward, but some significant limitations, right? So obviously bots are still allowed as long as you say you're a bot. And also doesn't do much to address the broader misinformation issues or things like coordinated inauthentic behavior, really the strategic stuff behind disinformation. The enforcement mechanisms, this would rely basic users to report rather than do any sort of proactive detection. And we know that bad actors aren't going to be telling on themselves. So it would put the onus on us who are using these platforms. And then, of course, $7,500 isn't much to these platforms or to these well-funded operations that are involved. So,
but if they, for example, get busted with a bot farm, that could be a bot farm busting, if you would, where they have 1,000 bots. That would be pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
So a platform like X would probably be likely to have something like that happen. All right. Very good. So, Britt, where can people find you?
Right. If you would like to follow along, I have a Substack, and I do like to get into some analysis, break down trends and insights. So you're welcome to follow me on Substack at Encyclopedia Britannica. I hope that name doesn't get me in trouble. I'll provide the link. I also have my website for my consulting. It's brittbischoff.com. And then earlydawn.ai if you're interested in checking out Early Dawn or getting more involved in this fight and doing whatever we can do.
Love it. And I like your purple logo on Encyclopedia Britannica. It's nice.
Thank you.
There you go. Very cool.
And we will, as always, have links to those websites and whatnot on the show notes at nobrainerpodcast.com. So if anybody needs to find Britt, they can. Thank you, Britt, for being with us. And thank you, everybody who's listened or watched. And if you are listening or watching, again, please be sure to subscribe, to rate, to review, and to tell all your friends. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations for guests or topics. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you so much to Britt for sharing your insights, your ideas, and your expertise on misinformation and disinformation in the age of AI. We will see you next time. Be safe out there. Take care.